Okay, we're going to go ahead and get the workshop started this evening. And just to make sure you are in the right place here, this is the workshop by the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District for the revised PM2.5 plan for the 2012 PM2.5 standard. The meeting is being held in person and telecast between our Fresno, Modesto, and Bakersfield offices and via Zoom. Just wanted to introduce myself real quick and some of the team up here. My name is John Klassen. I'm the Director of Air Quality Science and Planning at the Air District. I'm joined by Emily Nealon, Program Manager, Patrick Houlihan, Supervising Air Quality Specialist, and Molly Boyette, Air Quality Specialist. We also have a number of staff from the California Air Resources Board who are on this workshop as well, and we'll be presenting some slides here a little bit later. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation in person and via Zoom. And before we begin, here are some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell phone. During the meeting, all public participants on Zoom will be placed on mute by the host, and public members will not be able to mute or unmute manually. If you'd like to provide public comment during the comment period of this workshop, please step up to the podium to signify that you wish to speak or raise your hand on Zoom. Audio for members of the public will be unmuted once they are recognized to make a public comment. We also are going to allow one public comment per person for this workshop, and please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes so we can have time for other commenters. Everybody gets a chance to provide some comments if they'd like to. You can also submit your comments or questions via the Q&A function on Zoom, or submit your comments to webcast@valleyair.org email address. If you are presenting or providing a public comment, please state your name and affiliation and speak slowly to allow for smooth interpretation. At this time, our interpreters will share instructions on how to access the interpretation services.
Hola, buenas tardes. Yo soy Cristina, una de las intérpretes esta tarde. Mi compañera Tania está en Zoom. Vamos a proveer interpretación en español esta tarde en persona y en Zoom. Le doy unas instrucciones de cómo escuchar la interpretación en la computadora. Si está usando una computadora, en los controles de la reunión o el seminario web, seleccione el icono de interpretación que parece un mundo en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Seleccione español y silencie el audio original. En un teléfono o tableta, seleccione los 3 puntos para ver más opciones, seleccione interpretación y siga las mismas instrucciones de arriba. Y para hacer una pregunta o un comentario, seleccione el icono de reacciones para levantar su mano. Y también pueden mandar sus comentarios al correo electrónico que han visto en la pantalla anteriormente. Gracias.
Okay, so before we start the workshop this evening, just a few other comments I wanted to make. Those of you who've been involved in this for some time, we've had a number of workshops along the way. Just wanted to let you know that late last week, we posted some chapters and appendices, some draft chapters and appendices for this plan. Those are available on our PM2.5 plan webpage to review and to let us know your thoughts on that. And we'll continue posting other chapters and appendices once they become available here in the next few weeks. And we do appreciate all the public involvement and feedback we received along the way in the development of this revised plan. It's been very helpful, and it's helped us to get to where we are at this point. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Emily, who can start the presentation for us.
Perfect. Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. So today we're here to talk about our revised plan for the 2012 annual PM2.5 standard. EPA established the standard in 2013. Subsequently, the district was designated as moderate non-attainment in 2015. And following that, we submitted our 2016 PM2.5 plan with a request for reclassification to serious non-attainment. EPA approved our moderate plan and reclassified the district to serious non-attainment effective December of 2021, which then set a timeline for the district to be required to submit an attainment plan that addressed serious non-attainment area requirements. In 2018, we developed a comprehensive PM2.5 plan for all 3 of the PM2.5 standards, earlier than required for the 2012 standard. EPA proposed full approval of this plan for the 2012 standard in December of 2021, but subsequently reversed their decision and proposed disapproval in October of 2022. In response to this EPA reversal, CARB withdrew the plan with district concurrence in October of 2022. So because of this, we're developing a revised PM 2.5 plan for the 2012 standard, which relies on the analyses and foundation in the 2018 PM 2.5 plan, and also includes revisions incorporating latest guidance, feedback from EPA and latest proposals, public comments, and it also addresses the Federal Clean Air Act requirements. This last year in October, our district governing board adopted some initial elements for this plan, which we'll talk about here in a moment, which was submitted to EPA in November of 2023. The Valley faces a number of challenges with respect to meeting the federal air quality standards due to a number of factors, one of which is our unique combination of topography and meteorology. We also face a number of additional challenges, including our role as a major goods movement corridor. We have high population growth, pollution transport from other areas, wildfires, and drought. So because of all of these conditions, we're required to go above and beyond with respect to our emission reduction strategies in order to meet these targets in comparison to other regions. PM 2.5, just for a quick background, are particles with a diameter of 2.5 microns and smaller. They're a mixture of solid particles and liquid droplets in the air, and they're emitted directly or formed indirectly through chemical reactions between gases. The graphic on this slide is showing the size of a human hair compared to these particles. So you can see the blue circles are PM10 particles, and then within a PM10 particle is about 4 PM 2.5 particles. So these are very small. They can cause a number of health effects. One of the district's mission statements is to improve health and quality of life for all Valley residents through efficient, effective, and entrepreneurial air quality management strategies. We've adopted a number of regulations based on science and to prioritize health risk reduction. Our plan will demonstrate our ongoing efforts in partnership with CARB to improve air quality in the Valley through a comprehensive strategy. And through this public process, we are working with CARB to evaluate the health benefits through the attainment year for this plan. The plan is based on research and scientific foundation. We continue to serve as the administrator of the San Joaquin Valley-wide Air Pollution Study Agency in partnership with EPA, CARB, other air districts, and stakeholders. We've conducted a number of studies through the study agency with approximately $60 million invested towards cutting-edge Valley-based research. And because of this, we have an enhanced understanding of the contributing factors to Valley air quality, and we're also able to formulate equitable and effective emission control plans. Through our recent plans for both PM 2.5 and ozone, we've started implementing a number of emission reduction strategies for various sources. We also have community level emission and exposure reduction strategies through Assembly Bill 617 for our CARB selected communities of South Central Fresno, Shafter, Stockton, and Arvin Lamont. So this plan just continues to rely on Valley-based research and science in order to help bring us into attainment of the 2012 standard. I mentioned a couple of our previous plans for both PM 2.5 and ozone. These plans, in addition to all of the other plans and the strategies and commitments within them, build the foundation for this new 2024 PM 2.5 plan. Through these plans, we've adopted over 670 amendments to our rules, which has reduced stationary source ozone and PM forming NOx emissions by over 90%, as shown in the graphic on the slide. On the state level, CARB has adopted numerous mobile source emissions controls, and this combined effort represents the nation's toughest emissions control program. We also operate strong incentive programs with over $6.2 billion in public and private investment. And through these investments, the Valley continues to make major improvements with respect to air quality, but more reductions are still needed in order for us to reach attainment of the air quality standards. As one example, we have generations of rules for industrial boilers. Most recently, we adopted amendments to a couple of our boiler rules, 4306, 4320, and 4352 in 2020 and 2022. And through this, we've reduced emissions by over 98% by 2024 and beyond. A little bit more background of the sources of pollution, particularly PM2.5 here in the Valley. It comes from a number of sources, including sources like heavy-duty trucks, regular passenger vehicles, stationary sources or industrial sources here in the Valley, agriculture, residential wood burning, and commercial charbroiling, just to name a few. The district works closely with CARB and EPA to adopt regulations to reduce emissions here in the Valley. Just wanted to quickly touch on the regulatory authority of the different agencies. The federal government, or EPA, regulates stationary, area, and mobile sources, including interstate transportation. At the state level, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, regulates mobile and area sources of pollution within the state. At the local level, the district regulates stationary and area sources of pollution. And then other agencies also partner with us, such as the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the Department of Conservation, to regulate emissions from specific sources. So working with these other agencies, over time, we've developed a comprehensive attainment strategy, which includes district regulatory measures for local sources, incentive-based measures to accelerate the deployment of clean technology. At the state level, the CARB has a mobile source strategy. We also have a public education and outreach program, technology advancement and demonstration projects, transition to zero emissions technologies where feasible, and then federal mobile source measures also play into this as well. So with that, I will pass it over to Molly to touch on our progress, as well as get into some of our plan development.
All right, thank you, Emily. So as Emily mentioned, the comprehensive strategy we have in place has achieved significant emission reductions in the Valley, leading to significant improvement in air quality. And we have a few graphs on the next few slides to demonstrate this improvement. This slide here shows days meeting versus days exceeding the 35 microgram per cubic meter PM2.5 standard each year. We're looking at 2002 in the far left graph, showing 19% of days exceeding the 35 microgram standard and only 81% meeting. And in 2013, we see significant improvement from 2002. And then most recently in 2023, we see significant improvement in that we only see 2% of days exceeding the 35 microgram standard and 98% of days meeting that standard. This slide here shows valley-wide peak PM2.5 annual average concentration. We're looking at 2002 again, where the highest value in the valley was 24 micrograms per cubic meter. In 2013, it reduced down to 22.8 micrograms per cubic meter. And then in 2023, there was a significant improvement in that the highest value in the valley was only 13.5 micrograms. And this just demonstrates that we're getting really close to the 2012 annual PM2.5 standard of 12 micrograms. And breaking this down by monitoring site, this slide here has two graphs. The top one shows the annual average at each site in 2023. And the bottom graph shows the 3-year average or design value, which is the official metric used to determine attainment of the standard. And then we see these values in comparison to the 3 federal annual PM2.5 standards, the 97 standard of 15 micrograms, the 2012 standard of 12 micrograms, and the recently finalized 2024 annual standard of 9 micrograms. And we're looking ahead to that one, but this plan addresses the 2012 annual standard of 12 micrograms. And as you can see, many sites are already in attainment of this standard or near attainment of this standard. But as Emily stated, additional reductions are needed to attain the standard at all sites. And as Emily stated, we have addressed some initial elements, some requirements for the federal 2012 annual standard, and there are the remaining elements that we're addressing as part of this 2024 PM2.5 plan, and we'll go into more detail on these elements in the next few slides. So the initial SIP requirements that was submitted to EPA in November of 2023 included a comprehensive, accurate, and current inventory of actual emissions of relevant pollutants in the valley. It included a precursor showing that SOx, VOC, and ammonia do not contribute significantly to PM2.5 formation in the valley. It also included the demonstration that the best available control measures, or BACM, are being implemented for the control of direct PM2.5 and NOx. Additionally, the district adopted revisions to District Rule 2201, which is the modified stationary source review rule, in April of 2023, fulfilling the requirements for major sources. And this 2024 PM2.5 plan addresses the remaining Clean Air Act requirements, including the requirements for reasonable further progress and quantitative milestones. For reasonable further progress, or RFP, we must demonstrate annual incremental reductions in emissions of PM2.5 and significant precursors to ensure attainment of the standard as expeditiously as practicable. And quantitative milestones are to be achieved every 3 years until the area is redesignated attainment, and which demonstrate RFP toward attainment. So our analysis will demonstrate linear progress in PM2.5 and NOx emissions reductions leading up to attainment in 2030. The RFP years are 2019, 2022, 2025, 2028, and 2030. And the quantitative milestone years are 2025, 2028, and 2031. The analysis will present a schedule of the control measures and estimated emission reductions that are to be achieved by each milestone year. In addition, this plan addresses contingency measure requirements that provide for the implementation of specific measures if an area fails to attain or meet a milestone for RFP or attainment. The district and CARB recently addressed contingency measures for the 97, 2006, and 2012 PM2.5 standards based on draft EPA guidance, in which EPA proposed approval of in December of 2023. And so this plan includes contingency measures based on a thorough feasibility analysis of District Rule 4901, which is our residential wood burning rule, Rule 8051, open areas, as well as CARB's statewide smog check contingency measure. The attainment demonstration within this plan shows that specific annual emission reductions included in the plan are sufficient to attain the standard by 2030. The district and CARB conducted extensive modeling consistent with EPA guidance to estimate future PM2.5 design values, which demonstrate that even with implementation of BACM, attainment by 2025 is impracticable. This modeling demonstrates that the proposed control strategy in the plan will achieve necessary emission reductions to provide for attainment in 2030. The plan also includes a demonstration that the most stringent measures feasible for implementation in the Valley will be implemented no later than 2029 as required. The plan includes robust control measure analyses for all NOx and PM rules by the district and CARB, as well as local metropolitan planning organizations that provided analysis of local transportation control measures. These sections are posted on the web now as drafts for public review. The control measure analyses for the district include a thorough review of rule applicability, requirements, and emissions inventory, as well as a review of state and federal regulations and other suggested guidance and analogous rules from other regions. Then we assess technological and economic feasibility of further controls and present our evaluation findings. And as stated, the plan demonstrates most stringent measures for the control of direct PM2.5 and NOx for carbon district sources are being implemented no later than 2029. The attainment strategy within this plan includes a comprehensive suite of regulatory and incentive-based measures that will help us reach attainment of the standard by 2030. The adopted control measures are achieving 10.1 tons per day of PM2.5 and 128.5 tons per day of NOx emission reductions from the plan's base year of 2017 to attainment in 2030. And I will pass it over to staff at CARB to discuss the modeling for this plan as well as CARB's control measures.
Okay, thank you, Molly. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Chen, and today I am going to present air quality attainment modeling for the San Joaquin Valley PM2.5 State Implementation Plan, or SIP, to address the US EPA 2012 12 microgram annual PM2.5 standard. Next slide, please. So we will start with a brief overview of air quality modeling. The modeling system we use is a detailed mathematical representation of the different atmospheric processes that lead to air pollution. So to model the air quality of a region, we need to consider air pollutant emissions from both human activities and those that occur naturally, such as from plants. Once the pollution is emitted into the atmosphere, we also need to consider meteorology, which can affect how the pollution is transported or dispersed in the atmosphere. Chemistry is also a very important consideration because pollution is not only directly emitted, but can also be formed in the atmosphere through various chemical and physical processes. So for example, ammonium nitrate is a key contributor to PM2.5 pollution in the winter months and is formed through chemical processes in the atmosphere and not directly emitted. Finally, we also need to account for air pollution that is transported into California, and we call that the modeling boundary conditions. For example, air pollution that is transported across the Pacific Ocean into California. Together, all of these pieces make up the modeling system. Next slide, please. So I won't go through the details in this slide, but here we are showing the individual components of the modeling system used, including the air quality model, meteorological model, the global model that was used to develop boundary conditions for California, and the emissions inventory. Each of these components represents the current state of the science in modeling and are commonly used in both the regulatory and research communities. One thing to note is that our modeling covers all of California at a lower spatial resolution, and then most of Central and Northern California at a high spatial resolution. Next slide, please. This slide shows how modeling is used to demonstrate future attainment based on US EPA guidance. So the starting point for demonstrating attainment is the 2017 baseline design value, or DV, which is based on real-world measurements. And we will talk about this in more detail on the next slide. Per EPA guidance, the air quality modeling is used in a relative sense to predict how air quality will respond to changes in emissions from 2017 to 2030. The relative modeled change is called the relative response factor, or RRF. This modeled RRF is multiplied by the 2017 base year design value to calculate the future 2030 design value. Because PM2.5 is composed of different chemical components, this is done for individual PM2.5 components, and then they are summed up to get the total PM2.5 mass. This approach is consistent with the past San Joaquin Valley PM2.5 SIPs. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 2017 base year annual design values and how those design values are calculated. The annual PM2.5 design value is calculated as an average of 3 years annual PM2.5 concentrations. So for example, the 2017 design value is the average of the 2015, 2016, and 2017 annual average PM2.5 concentrations. to reduce the effect that one very clean or polluted year can have on the attainment demonstration, the US EPA recommends using the average of 3 design values, which we call the baseline design value. So for example, the 2017 baseline design value is the average of 2017, 2018, and 2019 annual PM2.5 design values. This table shows the 2017 baseline design values for sites within the San Joaquin Valley, and they represent the starting point for the attainment demonstration. So the Bakersfield plant site has the highest baseline design value at 16.97 micrograms per cubic meter, which needs to be reduced to 12 micrograms per cubic meter to demonstrate attainment. Next slide, please. So the first step in modeling is to assess how the model performs or compares to real-world measurements. We start this process by first evaluating the modeled meteorological fields. This slide shows example time series comparing modeled meteorology to surface observations. We want to make sure that our modeled meteorology resembles the atmospheric conditions in the San Joaquin Valley, because meteorology is a key input for air quality modeling and is a main driver for the formation and build-up of pollution. Because of the valley's unique topographic features and a mix of urban and agricultural lands, it is challenging to model meteorological conditions for the San Joaquin Valley. Developing the meteorological fields to use in air quality modeling is an iterative process, requiring many simulations before we are satisfied that the model accurately represents real-world conditions and can capture the main transport patterns, daily and seasonal variability, and various weather systems in the San Joaquin Valley. Next slide. Then the next step is assessing the model performance for the air quality modeling. On the right, we show example time series comparing modeled PM2.5 components to measured values in Fresno. This comparison is key because it gives us confidence in the modeling system as a whole, including the meteorology, the representation of the emission inventory, as well as the chemistry that leads to the formation of pollution. Overall, the modeling system is able to reproduce peak concentrations and daily seasonal variations in PM2.5 and its precursors, giving us confidence in the modeling system. Next slide, please. So the starting point for future attainment is assessing how much PM2.5 will be reduced by existing regulations and commitments. This slide shows results at Bakersfield plants for the 2030 baseline modeling. From 2017 to 2030, existing measures will achieve approximately 55% reduction in NOx emissions and 18% reduction in primary PM2.5 emissions. This will reduce the design value at Bakersfield plants from nearly 17 micrograms per cubic meter to 12.96 micrograms per cubic meter, which is above the 12 microgram annual standard and means that additional emission reductions are needed. The plot on the right shows the PM2.5 compositions for the 2017 and 2030 baseline modeling. The decrease in design value is primarily from a decrease in ammonium nitrate and organic and elemental carbon due to NOx and primary PM2.5 emission reductions. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 2030 attainment modeling, where we started with the 2030 baseline and added additional control measures to bring the design value below the 12 microgram threshold. These additional control measures include state SIP strategy commitments for on-road and off-road mobile sources, extending the district's residential wood burning curtailment program through the end of March, and agricultural incentives through the farmer program. You will hear more about these commitments after the modeling presentation. With the state SIP strategy commitments alone, the design value at Bakersfield plant site drops from 12.96 micrograms to 12.26 micrograms, which is still above the 12 microgram threshold. With additional measures, including extending the residential wood burning curtailment program through March and agricultural incentives, the 2030 design value at Bakersfield plants drops to 11.98 micrograms, which is below the 12 microgram threshold for the annual standard. Next slide, please. This slide shows the annual design values at all monitors for the 2030 attainment modeling run. In the previous slide, we showed that the 2030 design value at Bakersfield plants is 11.98 micrograms. In this table, you can see that all the sites attain the 12 microgram standard, with all sites except for Hanford and Bakersfield plants below 11 micrograms. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In addition to showing attainment at monitor locations, we must also demonstrate that there are no unmonitored areas that will exceed the 12 microgram standard. This slide shows the unmonitored area analysis results. The plot shows the predicted spatial distributions of the 2030 annual PM2.5 design values in the San Joaquin Valley. Every modeling grid cell meets the annual 12 microgram standard, except for an area surrounding the Lemoore military facility, which is consistent with past SIPs. We do want to note that the emission inventory for military equipment and activity is highly uncertain, so we are continuing to investigate whether the Lemoore peak is real or an artifact of how emissions are represented in the modeling. Next slide, please. We also compared how PM2.5 levels changed from 2017 to 2030 in the 4 AB617 communities in the San Joaquin Valley compared to the rest of the valley. Overall, the AB617 communities experienced a reduction of 30% in annual PM2.5 levels compared to 25% for the rest of the valley. Next slide, please. So in summary, with emission reduction commitments from the state SIP strategy, extending the residential wood burning curtailment program to the end of March, and agricultural incentives through the farmer program, modeling demonstrates the valley can attain the 12 microgram annual standard in 2030. In addition, AB617 communities experience a greater reduction in PM2.5 compared to the rest of the valley. And this concludes the modeling portion of the presentation. I will turn to the strategy presentation.
Thanks, James. This is Ariel
Thank
Fiddle.
you.
Hi, everyone. I'm the manager at CARB over our team that works really closely with the district on our state SIP strategy and the measures, coordinating the measures to support the attainment demonstration for this plan. So I'm going to give an overview of CARB's measures and emission reduction commitments and touch on our most stringent measure analysis for the annual PM standard. So our state SIP strategy, as shown here, was adopted by CARB's board on September 22nd, 2022. It's the reductions from this strategy and the measures that CARB committed to in this strategy that are contributing most of the reductions that CARB is committing to this PM2.5 SIP and the attainment demonstration for this plan. This strategy, it identified the level of action needed to meet air quality standards and support public health with a focus on, at the time, of the 70 part per billion ozone standard. That being said, this strategy really drives the pace and scale of CARB's rulemakings through the end of this decade. So we utilized these measures in the state SIP strategy and estimated the associated emission reductions in 2030 to support attainment of the PM 2.5 standard. Next slide. This figure identifies the list of measures CARB is pursuing from the state SIP strategy that will support attainment of the PM 2.5 standard in 2030. Some measures have actually already been adopted as regulations by the CARB board, and those are identified with an asterisk on the slide here. A couple of those specifically I want to mention are our advanced clean fleets and our in-use locomotive regulations, which were both very monumental, significant programs adopted by our board last year. The Advanced Clean Fleets regulation ensures cleanest vehicles are deployed in the on-road heavy-duty truck sector, driving zero-emission trucks by fleet requirements, which is a complement to our previously adopted Advanced Clean Trucks regulation. The in-use locomotive regulation, on the other hand, uses mechanisms available under CARB's authority to accelerate the adoption of advanced clean technologies in the locomotive sector, including driving to zero-emission technologies over the next 10 to 20 years. Many other regulations are currently undergoing their regulatory processes, including a new one for us in the other category listed here, the zero-emission standards for space and water heaters, which we will be working really closely with the district on since they have regulations also in this space. We are also pursuing a suite of off-road measures for off-road equipment and vehicles, including a new Tier 5 engine standard, zero emission requirements, and sources, including cargo handling equipment and things like that, that can be real significant contributors. We're also continuing to target reductions from on-road heavy-duty vehicles with a zero-emission truck measure, which will target the additional fleets beyond those subject to our Advanced Clean Fleets program I mentioned already. Next slide. So CARB's mobile programs, both those already adopted and the new measures, will provide significant NOx reductions in the Valley. The chart here shows NOx emissions in the Valley in the base year for this plan of 2017 and the 2030 attainment year under the baseline in that middle bar and with CARB's additional mobile controls on the right bar there. As you can see in the middle bar, adopted control programs that are already in our baseline emissions inventory, they get us most of the NOx reductions needed to reach the level of attainment for the PM standard in 2030. The blue arrow shows the reductions in mobile sources under the baseline, and the yellow and teal arrow shows the reductions in stationary and area sources under the baseline. The far right bar shows the NOx level in 2030 that is needed to attain the 12 microgram PM 2.5 standard, which is the level we reach after accounting for reductions from the state SIP strategy, measures I just touched on, and a couple other things that James actually just summarized in his presentation. Next slide. So this is the list of measures again that I showed for the state SIP strategy, but this shows here their schedules for both adoption and the planned implementation timelines. The measures that have already been adopted by the CARB board are indicated with a purple star there, their adoption years, and the ones that are still forthcoming are indicated in the green stars there for our planned timelines for bringing to our board for consideration, and for the beginning of implementation, which is indicated in the blue square for each measure listed there. Next slide. So this table specifically narrows in the focus to the recently adopted measures, both from our 2022 state SIP strategy, which I've mostly covered, and then a couple of things also from our 2016 state SIP strategy that had just been adopted in recent years. This shows their NOx and direct PM 2.5 emission reductions in the Valley that contribute to attainment. As you can see at the bottom there, the total for these recently adopted measures is 12.9 tons, and that's a portion of the 20 tons I mentioned previously on the bar chart, since these were measures that were adopted just in the last few years and had not been accounted for in our baseline emissions inventory. So we're doing a bit of an adjusted baseline to account for these. These are going to be really significant reductions, as I've shown, towards contributing to attainment of this standard. Next slide. In addition to all the measures on this slide, and all the ones that had just been discussed that have been adopted from our 2016 and 2022 state SIP strategies, there is one additional measure from CARB's San Joaquin Valley supplement to the 2016 state SIP strategy that was a part of the district's 2018 Valley PM2.5 SIP. That's also being factored into the attainment demonstration for this plan. And James touched on this as well, but this is a measure to reduce, to achieve emission reductions from agricultural equipment that is grown out of a measure that was in our 2018, or the district's 2018 PM2.5 plan. So that plan included a commitment to achieve 11 tons per day and 10 tons per day of NOx emission reductions in 2024 and 2025, respectively. Via incentives for agricultural equipment. And thanks to the significant efforts by the agricultural industry in partnership with CARB and the district, over 12,800 pieces of older ag equipment has been turned over to clean new equipment. And this 11 ton per day NOx emission reduction commitment in 2024 has been met. But some of the projects that contribute to that 11 tons per day will also meet US EPA's very strict SIP credibility requirements in 2030. So CARB is proposing to commit as a part of this plan to achieve those associated emission reductions in 2030 and to develop and submit the associated incentive measure documentation to US EPA in 2030 as well. Next slide. So this table shows the full suite of measures from the 2016 and 2022 state SIP strategies that are still to be adopted by the CARB board and their NOx and PM2.5 emission reductions that are all contributing to attainment of this annual PM standard. In addition to the 3.0 tons per day of NOx that we estimate to be achieved in 2030 from this agricultural equipment incentive measure that I just described, there's also one additional measure from CARB's 2016 state SIP strategy, the zero emission forklift regulation, which is actually going to CARB's board just in the next few months here, that will also achieve some benefits in 2030. The remaining measures listed here that are still to be adopted, they represent our CARB's total proposed emission reduction commitment to support attainment of the annual PM2.5 standard in 2030. That's 7.3 tons per day there. Next slide. In addition to evaluating our state SIP measures to identify those needed to support attainment of the PM2.5 standard, CARB also analyzed our entire control program to satisfy the most stringent measure control requirements for this standard. This is a level of stringency that exceeds both the more commonly referred to levels of stringency known as RACM, reasonably available control measures, and BACM, or best available control measures. I mean, it's required for this PM plan as we are requesting the extension, the 5-year extension of the attainment date out to 2030. CARB has a special authority, unique authority under the Federal Clean Air Act, which no other state has, to set standards for mobile sources that are more stringent than the federal government. We have over our history maximized utility of this unique authority such that our mobile source control programs go far beyond other states and the national programs. So given that fact, CARB has previously demonstrated and EPA has approved our mobile source programs do meet MSM requirements. Most recently, that was included in the approval of the San Joaquin's past PM2.5 plan. So CARB's analysis for MSM complements APCD's analysis and looks at all of our control measures currently being implemented by CARB, comparing those to those in other jurisdictions and states. And then we also do a look at measures in the state SIP strategy as well to see and identify that those do go beyond other programs and beyond MSM. Each mobile source category is broken into 3 main elements in our analysis: new vehicle and engine standards, in-use controls, and fuels, as you can see on the slide here. And we also do touch on the commitment we made in our state SIP strategy for the zero emission space and water heater standard, which we find to be the most stringent state level measure of its kind. So our conclusion from this most stringent measure analysis is that CARB's current control programs for each source category analyzed do meet MSM requirements. And that is the end of my slide deck, so I'll pass it back to the district.
Thank you, Ariel. My name is Patrick Houlihan. At this point, we're going to transition from CARB back to the district. I also have been alerted by our interpreter that speakers need to slow down, so I'm going to do my best to oblige. So now I will discuss the district's attainment strategy. This slide shows the extensive slate of rules that we have in place to reduce not only direct PM2.5, but also the NOx precursor. Recent amendments to some of these rules have implementation dates that began on July 1st of this year. Some have additional rule compliance dates in the near future, and all previous amendments continue to be implemented. Here's our proposed prospective strategy to achieve additional reductions. I'll discuss these more in detail in the slides to follow. Just want to point out that we'll begin the public process of rulemaking for rules 4550 and 4901 next year in 2025. The fireplace wood stove changeout program and the low dust harvester replacement program have been ongoing for several years now and will continue into the future. Conservation management practices are Rule 4550. This rule is applicable to on-field farming and agricultural operational sites. This rule reduces PM10 emissions by 35.3 tons per day. And because PM2.5 is a component of PM10, it has reduced PM2.5 as well. Those reductions are achieved through reduced passes of agricultural equipment and other conservation practices. The new focus will be on reducing emissions from the fallowing of agricultural land. And to do so, we'll have meaningful engagement with the necessary stakeholders, the National Resources Conservation Services, and other agencies. Wood burning fireplaces and wood burning heaters are Rule 4901. This rule limits direct particulate matter amongst other emissions. The 2019 amendments were brought about as commitments from the 2018 PM 2.5 plan, and those included lowering the wood burning curtailment levels, enhancements to the district's incentive grant funding levels, public outreach and education, more enforcement, and updated air quality forecasting programs. The new focus will be on further reduction of burning by extending the wood burning season through the end of March. Currently, the season is November through the end of February. As mentioned before, the district will continue these incentive-based measures. We have refunded the replacement of close to 30,000 wood burning devices with cleaner options, including some zero emission options. The zero emission option is the electric heat pump space heater. The low dust harvester replacement program has funded over 200 new machines, and there is $25 million in funding for future replacements. So innovative measures for further studies. We will continue to research and expand our knowledge of residential and commercial zero emission appliance options, as well as follow and evaluate other agency efforts such as CARB, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and other agencies as well. For commercial charbroiling, we'll continue to evaluate control technology for underfire charbroilers through our recently formed Charbroiler Collaborative Work Group. And for stationary source NOx and particulate matter measures, we will continue to evaluate the feasibility of emerging technologies and measures as they become available in the future. We'll continue to identify opportunities to gain co-benefits from existing and future programs related to greenhouse gas reductions, energy efficiency, and energy use. For landscaping, we'll pursue opportunities for accelerated deployment of zero emissions equipment and also promoting best practices. And then we'll continue to evaluate innovative out-of-the-box measures to pursue additional emission reductions as technologies, practices, and policies evolve. Now, the need for federal mobile source reductions. Attainment of federal standards will require significant reductions in emissions from mobile sources that are not within our jurisdiction. It is imperative that the federal government reduce emissions from sources such as heavy-duty trucks, locomotives, and other mobile sources that fall under federal purview. The district will continue to advocate for state and federal action on mobile sources, as well as seek additional funding in order to achieve emission reductions from mobile sources. And with that, I will now turn it back to Molly.
Thank you, Patrick. So as mentioned, some initial draft plan sections are published on our webpage for public review. They are available at the link on this slide, or you can go to the district webpage and look for the air quality plans page. Looking ahead at next steps for the remaining plan development process, we will continue to receive feedback on the elements presented at this workshop today, as well as the draft plan that has been published. We will incorporate public comments received throughout the remainder of the plan development as appropriate. And we plan to publish the proposed plan by May 21st for public review and comment before taking it to our governing board on June 20th of this year. And as always, we welcome public comment and engagement throughout the process. If you have any comments or questions, you can contact me, Molly Boyette, using the contact information here on this slide. And if you haven't already signed up for the district's PM plans listserv, you can do so at the link on the slide to receive any updates on the remainder of the plan development process. And here I'll pass it back to Emily to open the floor for comments and questions.
Okay, thank you. First, we will go to in-person commenters, and just wanted to remind, I know John touched on this at the beginning of the workshop, but we'll be asking that you provide one comment and limit your comment to 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'll gently ask that you wrap up your comments. Do we have any public commenters in Modesto?
No public comments in Modesto.
Thank you, Nick. Do we have any public comment in Bakersfield?
No public comment in Bakersfield.
Thanks, Erin. Any public commenters in person in Fresno that would like to speak? Please step up to the podium. I think the podium would be probably better. Thank you.
And make sure it's clean pizza, no charboiled or anything like that, right? Oh, we can't use wood anymore, so I don't know how you're going to cook it, but whatever. Again, Manuel Cunyanise, Farmers Lake. This is a question probably ties to, in the document, CARB is in control of mobile sources in the sense of trucks. And is the young lady from CARB still on, or is she off? She's still on? Okay, great. It deals with Tier 5 engines that we have not, I mean, we've seen a model of one. We've seen what it looks like, but is the cost. And the question becomes, this item, I believe, is until 2030. And yet we're being forced into electric by 2035. So you're going to spend 500 grand. I understand the engine costs 500,000, the Tier 5 engine. Is that true, number one? Number two, if you're going to make us go into Tier 5s, but you're also forcing us into electric by 2035, all vehicles, at least the movement of goods. The problems I have, I know you have to meet the attainment, but I have to ship food across this country. Has CARB done the homework to identify the other states when we have to move cargo from here to Texas or from here to New York? Is the objective to change trucks? An electric truck in California, you stop at the county line, you drop the container off, and then another truck picks it up and takes it to New York. That's a fuel-driven truck. Tier 3, Tier 2, whatever it is. I have some really great concerns about that. I know we need to achieve the emissions, But what are you going to do to my industry if I can't move product? Because those trucks are not going to come in here. And yet you're mandating a tier 5 now, or you're going to go to a tier 5. You've got the mandate for electric. What about the movement of goods, perishable commodities? The last item will be TRUs. The refrigeration units have to go to all electric. Again, when I leave the county line or the state line, excuse me, what do? I now have to transfer all of that product out of one truck into another TRU container or another trailer, because there's not going to be electric along the route. I'm not going to find a plug-in in Texas. I'm not going to find a plug-in in Tennessee. And if I move 2 to 3 degrees in a refrigeration unit, 34 to 36, the buyer will reject it. So now if the product gets there and the monitor inside the truck of the trailer says that it went 37, they're going to reject the entire load. So this doesn't pertain to you at the district. I know that. But I also want to say lastly is agriculture is doing its part. The 11 tons, and previous to that, it was 15 tons of NOx for voluntary tractor program. So the voluntary program incentive that this district's worked very hard on, and with CARB staff, with the farmer program. So I want to commend them. There are some great things there that we've done together to show that we can do some of these things. My big concern is on transportation. We are going to get, excuse the expression, screwed on movement of our goods. We're going to have to dump it. We're going to have to dump milk or dump beef or dump fruit, because I don't think CARB has done their analysis to know when I get to the state line, what do I do? So that question is for CARB. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Looks like we have an additional commenter in Fresno.
Yeah, this is Michael Benjamin. I want to respond to Manuel's comments or questions. I just want to start, Manuel, by thanking you for your engagement and the feedback and the conversations that you've had with us regarding implementation of CARB regulations is really helpful for us as we try to understand what the challenges are and how best to address those. I think as we're looking at 2030, the primary focus is going to be on implementing the already adopted regulations, but looking out to 2037, we are going to need to be looking at Tier 5. We are going to need to be looking at electrification. It's challenging to adopt and implement these regulations. We understand that, but we also understand that we're going to need to achieve emission reductions across the board from many different sectors. We very much appreciate the engagement of you and others in the ag community who've already done so much to achieve emission reductions from the ag sector, and we look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael. Next up, we have Roger.
Thank you. Roger Isom with California Cotton Ginners and Growers Association and the Western Agricultural Processors Association. And thank you for the opportunity to comment on this plan. Pretty important plan. What I want to start off by saying, and the district's noted this, we have based every decision since this district was formed and in dealing with agriculture that science would always dictate what we do. And if you go back, and I know you touched on it with CRAPAX and Seacoast, and that those really guided us on what sources to control and how best to control them and not waste our time and get minimal reductions. We were able to get to attainment of the PM10 standard and the 1 hour ozone standard really because of the results of those studies. So they're just so importantly critical. What I would say going forward on this, whether it's the CMPs you're going to look at or other measures, please continue to focus on that science. I know that the study agency still exists. I can tell you from the ag community that we stand by to work with the district and ARB on any research that needs to be done on some of these proposed measures when it comes to CMPs, as we always have, and as we've always amended the CMP rule to incorporate additional measures. We stand by to continue to do that. So please can make sure that we're focused on that science. Speaking of the science, I know that the concept of low dust harvesters was mentioned several times. And while we like the program, the incentive program, I just want to caution you that on directly emitted PM2.5, not a lot of reductions there. There is some, but it's very minimal. PM10, very significant. It makes a huge difference. But when it comes to PM2.5, not as much. Certainly, if it's a self-propelled unit and we can upgrade it to the latest tier technology, absolutely, you get the additional NOx reductions in addition to that incremental PM2.5. So I want to say that, you know, we support that as long as there continues to be an incentive program. And I know EPA and the district have both continued to fund those, but I want to make sure that that's really the only way that program works, because it's expensive equipment that you're asking farmers to implement. And I can assure you right now, nut prices are not anywhere near where they need to be for people to go out there and buy new equipment on their own. I do want to echo a concern that Mr. Cunha brought up with Tier 5. As ARB sets these goals for electrification, we're talking to some of the manufacturers, and they're not interested or wasting time on Tier 5. So I just want to make sure that we continue to look at that as you go forward, as to how much research or how much effort is going to be put into Tier 5 if the jump and the leap is to go to all electric. So just something to think about. The last one is the farmer program. And I know that CARB put up there that, you know, existing reductions that will get us to 3 tons by 2030. I can tell you from the ag community, we've never wanted to stop, and we won't stop. We're still pursuing additional funds in the next farm bill. We have been at the Capitol several times this year already, even with a very constrained budget, still asking for farmer to be funded. And quite honestly, if the state wants to achieve their climate goals, farmer needs to be funded. So what I would say is that as long as we can keep that program going, as long as we can keep it funded, I think there's going to be an opportunity there for even more reductions than what CARB is looking at here, or what the district's looking for. But it must be funded. I can't emphasize that enough. We're going to be in Sacramento for the next 2 days, carrying that very same message, that not only for climate goals, but for the district to achieve their PM2.5, not just this standard, but the next one, we've got to keep farmer going. It's a proven program. It allows farmers to do it as they can afford it, and yet replace it in a much advanced time frame than they normally would. Because I just want to remind everybody that the average age of tractors before farmer was 27 years. Now, through the several years of farmer, it's down to 13 years. So we want to continue that trend, right? We're asking guys to replace it much sooner than they would otherwise. So it's because of those incentives. So again, thank you. The ag community stands here willing to work with you guys, as we always have, as long as it's based on science and we continue those incentive programs. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Roger. Any other public commenters in the Fresno office? Seeing none, we will move to our Zoom commenters. First, we have Janet. Janet, I'm going to prompt you to unmute.
Thank you.
There you go, Janet. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you. I'm going to address my concern on how the San Joaquin Valley air affects all of us. 2015, we started the PM 2.5 plan. Having asthma, I was thrilled with the plan. I had high hopes that the PM 2.5, which was keeping me inside the house during the inversion months especially, would lessen air quality levels, enabling me to be able to go outside during the winter months. I attended all meetings addressing the PM 2.5 plan with great expectations. Years passed with no real progress toward the plan giving us clean air to breathe during the inversion months. I don't go out in the air measuring above 15 micrograms per cubic meter. Otherwise, I will have problems regarding my asthma. Since then, a new plan was created, AB 617. I saw the momentum of the PM 2.5 plan wane Focus was being addressed on AB 617. My hope for clean air during inversion months was waning. AB 617 addressed the entire state. PM 2.5 plan addressed the unique conditions in the San Joaquin Valley. Years passed with less focus on the PM 2.5 plan. The majority of San Joaquin Valley residents are being affected by PM 2.5, especially during inversion months. The serious problem of PM 2.5 during inversion months is the pollutants and particulates are lowered and concentrated to exactly the level where we breathe. The PM 2.5 plan is an exceedingly important plan to activate in the San Joaquin Valley for providing clean air for all of us, including those of us with respiratory diseases. Our reactions to air quality are true measures of air quality status. If the air quality causes us ill health, that is a measure of our air quality. This past winter was difficult until the rain started in January. As long as it was raining, the air was good, so I could go outside to walk my dog and enjoy being outside. Usually March is a good month to go outside. This year, we had many days of PM 2.5 at a level that was unsafe for me and other residents who have asthma or other respiratory diseases, especially those affected by PM 2.5. Winds coming from the northwest help clean our air. We look forward to northwest winds. It's difficult to have less months with clean air enough for us to safely go outside. I love being outside. I love being out to walk, work in my garden, just be outside. I love being outside. A quick reduction of inversion months, PM 2.5, is to ban residential burning. Many of us have been asking for this, except for those who have no other method of heating. But the majority of us in Fresno have central air and heating. There are thousands of San Joaquin residents who would greatly benefit by having clean air during inversion months and during the rest of the year. With children safely going outside to enjoy playtime recess at school. My concern is how our air affects the people living in San Joaquin Valley. The PM 2.5 plan addressed that very thing. I don't see a district board member once suggested I should move from the San Joaquin Valley. This actually was said to me. And I don't see how that would help the remaining residents of San Joaquin Valley. We depend upon the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District to provide us, all of us, with clean, safe air. We depend upon the San Joaquin Air Pollution Control District and CARB and EPA to give us safe air.
Hey, Janet, I'm going to ask that you wrap up your comments.
Thank you. We depend upon support of the PM 2.5 plan, which is a very important plan to all of us. Please move the plan to where it benefits San Joaquin Valley residents by having clean air at low levels for all of us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Next up, we have Mark Rose. Mark, we're going to prompt you to unmute here shortly.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity to comment and for holding this webinar. Mark Rose with National Parks Conservation Association. I wanted to start by just expressing some concern over the timing of this plan. This plan was due at the end of last year. Here we are in April. it's been delayed several times. I think we just most recently heard that it's not going to be voted on in front of CARB this June, but at a later time, hopefully this summer. And we still don't even have a full plan in place. So, you know, just a general concern that, you know, agencies are dragging their feet on getting this plan out. And we know that this is something that has occurred with many of these PM 2.5 plans, submitting them late, submitting them incomplete, and failing to reach attainment over and over again. I would ask that, you know, hopefully we can have a additional webinar once we are able to see the entire plan with all of the control measures, that the additional control measures included. At the very least, I would hope that we could see a full plan before, you know, 2 weeks before the San Joaquin Valley's board meeting where they vote on this. So we have adequate time to read through the entire plan and provide substantive comments on it. I'll also just express some concern on, you know, the modeling for attainment, showing that we're only going to meet it at one of the monitoring sites by 0.2 micrograms by 2030. I mean, you already submitted a plan saying that you were going to meet it next week. Now you're asking for 5 additional years to barely meet it. And as we've seen with other PM 2.5 plans, just because you do an attainment demonstration, say that you're going to meet the plan, does not mean that we're going to meet it. We've seen failure after failure after failure with these plans. So what I'm getting at here is I think more needs to be done. I'm glad to see that you're looking at some additional measures. That's something that you haven't done with the last few PM 2.5 plans, but we need even more. Looking through, you know, the control measure analysis that the district did, Appendix C, I think there's a variety of areas where, despite claiming that you have the most stringent measures, there are more controls that could be required to ensure that we actually do reach attainment by 2030 if we're going to be given an extra 5 years here. I can point to, you know, ultra low NOx burners or SCR for a variety of different rules governing boilers, process heaters, steam generators, off-road ice engines, combustion turbines. These are all areas where when you compare the Valley Air District's rules with the South Coast rules or other air district rules, for certain categories of all of these technologies, South Coast has more stringent measures. It's clear. For Valley Air District's rules on residential space and water heaters, we know that the Bay Area and other air districts are looking at electrification of those measures. And I think we all understand the cost element of that and how that might be borne by low-income residents of the San Joaquin Valley. But you provide incentives for all sorts of programs, whether they're needed or not. Why can't you be providing incentives or exemptions for low-cost households and be allowing, you know, people who can't afford it to be required to adopt those technologies? For the ISR rule, I understand the Valley Air District has led on this in the past, and we're really appreciative of that. However, I would point to South Coast's new rule having some more stringent requirements. I would say especially the requirements as it relates to existing warehouses. I think that's the most stringent measure. I think that must be adopted here in the San Joaquin Valley. I'll point to, you know, it's great. I think we all support the farmer program, and we like to see the, you know, everything that's been achieved through incentive-based measures. I'm concerned to see that the state is going to be relying on aggregate commitments for additional off-road ag turnover. I think it's 2024. We need an end date. We need a deadline somewhere along the road to start forcing technology, to start forcing more turnover and more phase out. So, you know, it's the only mobile source category that doesn't have an actual like phase out deadline. We need to start that clock to start forcing the companies and farmers to start adopting higher tiers or electrification of off-road mobile sources. And lastly, I know it's been brought up many, many times by many, many advocates in the past, but I'm just confused by the Valley Air District logic around residential wood burning and how they can claim that it's the most stringent measure out there. I mean, in Appendix C, page 189, you admit that there are other jurisdictions in the United States that have adopted more stringent requirements, that have completely ended burning in uncertified devices. So, I mean, if you look at the most stringent measures requirements in the Clean Air Act, it says the most stringent measures that have been achieved in practice in any state and that can be feasibly implemented in the non-attainment area. We know that it has been achieved in practice in other jurisdictions. It's been achieved in practice here in California. It's been achieved in practice in Tacoma and Pierce County.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to ask that you wrap up your comments.
Okay. But how you can claim that that's the most stringent measure is your current no burn thresholds, when there have been other jurisdictions that have achieved in practice ending burning. I don't understand the logic. If you could provide some context on how the Valley's program is more stringent than that, I would appreciate it. But right now I'm confused on how you can claim that your measure is the most stringent when other jurisdictions in the United States have already phased out burning.
Thanks, Mark, for those comments. This is John Klassen. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context to some of the comments you had at the beginning of sharing your thoughts. As far as the measures for this plan, what we presented at the workshop tonight, these are all the measures that will be included for the strategy for this plan. So there aren't new measures forthcoming that we'll be presenting on later. This is the full strategy for this plan. I wanted to note too that as far as having time to review the entire plan document itself, we'll continue posting draft chapters and appendices in the coming weeks, but by May 21st, that Molly outlined, we'll be posting the final draft of all the documents, chapters, appendices, the full plan analysis will be there for a 30-day review for you to review. You can provide public comment during that 30 days ahead of our district governing board meeting in June, just to give an update on the schedule. Thanks again, Mark.
Next up, we have Cynthia. Cynthia, we're going to prompt you to unmute here shortly.
Hello, good evening. Cynthia Pinto Cabrera with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Yeah, Cynthia with CVAC. I'm also a Madera County resident, wanting to express similar concerns as Mark Rose just before me. Back in 2018, when this plan was initially adopted, or this version of the plan was initially adopted, y'all were very confident in a 2025 attainment. Now here we are hearing that attainment won't likely be reached until 2030, which is incredibly disappointing, given the public health crisis that's really facing the San Joaquin Valley. A lot of our residents and community members, especially our low-income communities of color, have began to normalize lethal and deadly diseases like cancer, because they're just so common in our communities. And we understand some of the legal intricacies of most stringent measures, but we really urge you to look beyond those and act with this sense of urgency of the public health crisis. It's great to see how you all are considering public health a lot more than you have before in the past, which is a positive note. However, we still believe that more can be done. And again, force you to look beyond those legal intricacies as we are, facing this public health crisis. And again, we hope, expressing disappointment for the 2030 deadline, but that's, just expressing disappointment, just honestly, both as an advocate, but as a San Joaquin Valley resident, it's incredibly just painful to see some of these processes unveil. And moving forward, we hope that we can see this plan publicly broadcasted earlier during the week, not on a Friday night when people are trying to unravel and enjoy their weekend after a long work week of whatever they may do. So we really hope that a little bit more public transparency is also brought forward as we look towards the adoption of this really important plan. So just with that, thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Cynthia, this is John Klassen. Thanks for their comments. Just wanted to note too that, yes, we're projecting a 2030 attainment date. Right now, the design value projected is 11.98, but in the modeling analysis that's done for this, and maybe Jeremy or others on the CARB team can talk about how the work we do to try to project the future air quality is based on very conservative assumptions about meteorology. There could be some wildfire impacts in some of the data. So even though we're projecting something in the future at 12 micrograms, this is a very conservative way to do it, where we could likely be well below that by 2030. So I don't know, Jeremy, if you're on, if you wanted to say a bit about what we do for our baseline meteorology and those requirements to make sure this is very conservative in how we do this.
Yeah, Don, I can chime in on something. So one thing I would add is that we are being conservative in terms of not excluding wildfire impacts. We know that wildfires are occurring and generally increasing in severity. And so we are not excluding those impacts in this. So in that sense, we are being conservative in terms of the impact that the emission reductions will have. So we do think that this gives us your design value.
Thanks, Jeremy. I just wanted to note too, just looking at some of the design value tables that we shared this evening, by 2030, the majority of the valley is below 12 micrograms and will likely be there before the year of 2030. It's just about the last few remaining sites will need that time to get to below 12 micrograms. So most of the valley will be there ahead of that year.
Perfect, thanks guys. Our last commenter is Perry Allert. Perry, we're gonna prompt you to unmute.
Good evening. My name is Perry Ellert. I'm with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and I'm going to echo some of the comments that were just made. So as mentioned, the deadline to submit the 2012 plan was in December of last year. So unfortunately, the Valley is late in submitting this very important plan yet again, and is now asking for a 5-year extension, which is extremely disappointing to hear. And this is concerning that there's now even a stricter PM2.5 standard passed by EPA, which the Valley is going to need to meet. And given the Valley's difficulty in meeting not just this standard, but the 1997 standard, their district and CARB really need to work together with local community on coming up with a clear and strong path forward for the Valley. Not just focusing on how to barely meet the 2012 standard by 2030, but how we're going to meet this new standard sooner rather than later. There are a number of control measures for further emission reductions that Leadership Council, residents, and other organizations have suggested, and now is a perfect opportunity to make those changes. As mentioned, the ISR rule is stricter in South Coast and results in more emission reductions, and we think this is a great opportunity for the Valley to improve their ISR rule. There are additional measures that we're also suggesting, like reductions from emissions from ag equipment, pesticides, banning fireplaces and new developments, and improving the district's animal confinement rule. We're also disappointed in the lack of community engagement with the portions of the plan which have already been submitted, especially the Valley's ammonia precursor analysis. We disagree with the assertion that ammonia is not a precursor to PM2.5. Ammonia has been historically underregulated and could be some of the easiest and cheapest opportunities for emission reductions, which would result in large health benefits for the Valley. We're also disappointed with the lack of community engagement with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act assurances. And lastly, we would echo the ask for additional public workshops on all elements of this plan prior to it going to the board. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Perry, for your comments. We have one additional commenter, Thomas Menz. You're going to be prompted to unmute.
Good evening, Thomas Menz, resident of Fresno County. So here in Fresno County, there are still 90 to 100 days of the present 120-day wood burning curtailment period, the inversion months that Janet referred to, when PM2.5 levels prevent me from going outside for a vigorous walk, as the doctor advises. Taking vigorous exercise in moderately polluted air does more harm than good. A majority living here are similarly sensitive to moderately polluted air. On the handful of days when county monitors register below 12 micrograms per cubic meter, of course, on those rare days, then everyone's free to burn, and one ends up breathing smoke on every street where someone's decided to light up. So extending the wood burning season through March, well, that's nice. At least that'll allow us to point and cheer at more days in the winter curtailment season to meet the 2012 annual standard, but doesn't do much to cope with those existing 4 months. And with 5.5 tons per day per winter day from residential wood burning going forward with no end in sight through 2030, I just don't see much hope. I sure wish this revision, as others have mentioned, permanently banned the thousands of highly polluting, uncertified wood burning heaters, a measure that other plans have provided for. And that more stringent measure with respect to that source category would help. It's also a concern that there are homes built with natural gas heat that have been given a permanent sole source of heat exemption from Rule 4901. Ideally, in my opinion, wood burning should be limited to registered users for whom there's no other source of heat whenever ambient fine particulate levels are predicted to exceed 9 micrograms per cubic meter in any county. The failure to provide contingency measures to reduce wood burning in the hotspot counties, should those counties fail attainment, as seems likely, is a real disservice. So I guess that concludes my robust participation in this latest episode of Robust Public Engagement. And I wish you all a good evening.
Thanks, Thomas, for your comments. And with that, I'm not seeing any additional public comments in person or on Zoom. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude the workshop, and just wanted to thank you all again for participating, not only today, but through the entire public process. Have a great night.